It started with something so subtle, most people would have missed it entirely. A quiet question, barely more than a whisper, that stopped everyone cold. Doria, Meghan's own mother, leaned forward one afternoon and asked something that shouldn't have needed asking. What are Archie and Lilibet really like? I hardly know them. The room fell silent. Because grandmothers are supposed to know these things without asking. They're supposed to carry memories of birthday candles and bedtime stories, of tiny hands grabbing theirs and voices calling their name. But Doria couldn't describe any of that, not because her memory failed her, but because those moments, she claimed, had never happened. She had barely been around them at all. Those few tentative words opened a door nobody expected to find. If the woman closest to Meghan, her own mother, rarely spent time with the children, then who did? And why did she sound almost nervous to ask? It was the first crack in what had seemed like a flawless image. The picture-perfect family life shown to the world suddenly didn't quite line up with what was happening behind closed doors. And once that first doubt had surfaced, others began to follow. Truths started slipping through the cracks. Truths from someone who had been inside that home far longer than most. Someone who had seen nearly everything, except for one thing. The one thing that should have been impossible to miss. When the former housekeeper finally came forward, she didn't shout or dramatize. Her voice was calm, almost weary, like someone unburdening themselves of a secret they never wanted to carry. She had worked inside Meghan and Harry's home for months, 5 days a week, 12 hours a day. She walked those hallways, cleaned those rooms, and witnessed firsthand the daily rhythm of the household. Yet something felt profoundly wrong. The house, she said, never felt alive. It didn't hum with the chaos and warmth of a family. It felt staged, like a set designed for filming and then abandoned once the camera stopped rolling. Every surface was immaculate. Each object was precisely in its place. Too perfect. Nothing was out of place. Nothing looked lived in. And that, she explained, was the problem. Real houses, especially houses with young children, are never that neat. There are toys sprawled across the floors, small shoes by the door, half-finished drawings on the countertops. It's loud, laughter and tears, the sound of little feet pitter-pattering up and down the hallways. In this mansion, none of that existed. The housekeeper never saw toys. She'd never seen any children's clothing drying anywhere. She'd never heard children giggle or throw a fit. Not even a misplaced sippy cup or lost stuffed animal. Nothing. She'd walk through rooms and stop, listening, waiting for some sign of life. But there was nothing. A thick, unsettling silence that made her stomach turn. One day, she quietly asked another staff member, "Do you ever see the children?" The woman just shook her head and whispered back, "Never." And this wasn't after a week or two. This was after months of being there from sunrise to sunset. The world believed Archie and Lilibet were growing up behind those gates. But the people who actually worked inside, who cooked the meals and cleaned the floors and lived there day after day, couldn't find a single trace of them. It was that eerie emptiness that made the housekeeper start asking herself the very same question Doria had whispered. Where were the children? The more the housekeeper reflected on her time there, the stranger everything seemed. In a normal home, you see a mother moving through the space naturally, checking on her kids, talking to them, picking up their things. But Meghan's presence never felt like that. At first, she would visit the house 3 or 4 times a week. But even then, she never stayed long. She would arrive like someone stepping onto a stage, always in motion, always appearing busy. The housekeeper noticed she was never alone. There was always someone with her, Marcus Anderson, a blonde assistant, sometimes even an entire camera crew with lighting and sound equipment. To the staff, it stopped feeling like a family home. It felt like a production studio, a place where scenes were filmed but not actually lived. As the weeks went on, Meghan's visits dropped to just twice a week. The staff quietly said to one another that she seemed more often like a visitor than a mom, like checking up on a project rather than coming home to her kids. Even more peculiar, the housekeeper began noticing that Meghan's behavior inside the house felt rehearsed. She spoke only when cameras were around, glanced much more at her reflection than into the rooms, and moved through space as if performing a scene. It started to make sense why the housekeeper felt the home didn't belong to a family. It belonged to an image, and that image was starting to crack. Then came the night everything shifted. The housekeeper was wiping down the kitchen counters when she heard shouting echo down the hallway. It was loud, sharp, impossible to ignore. She moved closer, not to eavesdrop, but because the voices were simply too loud to block out. She recognized Meghan's voice immediately. But what made her freeze was Harry's voice. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even firm. He sounded desperate, pleading. When the housekeeper reached the doorway, she saw something that shook her. Harry was holding Meghan's arms, begging her to stop as she tried to strike him. He wasn't fighting back. He wasn't raising his voice. He just looked defeated. His face was flushed, not with anger, but with humiliation and exhaustion. Nearby stood Marcus Anderson, stepping in to pull Meghan away as Harry sank into a chair. Then came the silence of the house, a cold, heavy silence. The housekeeper quietly stepped in and brought Harry a glass of water. He whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, she said, she saw everything. The weight he was carrying, the pain behind his eyes, the sadness of a man who once stood tall before the world, but now seemed lost inside his own home. Everything changed after that night. The smiles faded, laughter disappeared, tension thickened, and the illusion of a happy home grew thinner and thinner. But perhaps the most shocking part of her account came when the housekeeper said that she never once saw Meghan pregnant. Not with Archie, not with Lilibet, not in the months she worked there. She didn't see a baby bump. She didn't see morning sickness. She didn't see the little day-to-day changes which change a woman expecting a child. Nothing. At first, she thought maybe she'd simply missed the signs. But she worked 12-hour shifts 5 days a week. She saw Meghan nearly every day before the visit slowed down. She saw her up close, passing down hallways, adjusting her clothes, and there were no signs of pregnancy. When she quietly mentioned it to other staff members, they said the same thing. They too had noticed nothing. Meanwhile, outside the mansion gates, the magazines were showing glowing photos, elegant dresses, radiant smiles, hands cradling a perfectly round belly. But inside the home, the image didn't quite line up. The housekeeper's voice never wavered when she shared this part. She wasn't making wild claims, only stating what she witnessed. Or rather, what she didn't. And to her, that was the most telling truth of all. Something with those pregnancies just didn't add up. Months after she had left, the housekeeper sat alone in her apartment one evening when the Meghan and Harry documentary aired. She didn't know what to expect, maybe glimpses of the home she had cleaned, perhaps rooms she recognized. But instead, something strange happened when she watched. The house in the special did not look like the house in which she worked. The angles were off, the rooms were wrong shapes. Even the garden, the one she had walked past every single day, didn't appear the same. This documentary showed Meghan smiling in soft sunlight, cradling a baby bump that this housekeeper insists she never saw in real life. There were scenes of Meghan and Harry playing with their children in a bright garden, chickens clucking nearby, laughter floating through the air. But to the housekeeper, it all felt foreign and unfamiliar, almost as if watching actors recreate someone else's life. She had cleaned the real garden, she had swept under the real chicken coop, but she had never seen the children there, not once. What the world saw as intimate family moments, she viewed as scenes filmed somewhere else. Maybe in a rented property, maybe in a studio, but not in the home she knew. And that realization hit her hard. If the footage wasn't filmed where they actually lived, what else wasn't real? That question stayed with her long after the credits rolled. The housekeeper had always known that Meghan and Harry wanted their privacy. But the longer she worked there, the more she felt the house wasn't designed to protect a family. It was built to protect secrets. Every morning before entering, staff had to surrender their phones. Security guards checked their bags, patted down their pockets, and scanned them for anything that could record or capture images. Cameras inside monitored the staff, not the children. Instead of laughter, silence followed. The rules were strict and absolute. No photos, no notes, no conversations with anyone outside. She remembered one afternoon, a fellow worker merely took a photo of flowers near the front entrance. Within minutes, security was there, demanding her phone and deleting the image. The atmosphere turned ice cold. From that moment on, the housekeeper understood this wasn't about privacy. This was about control. The home wasn't a place of safety. It was like a fortress where the truth was locked behind thick walls, and silence was the only language allowed. As days passed, the housekeeper realized she wasn't alone in